The Jets can learn a lot from the four teams in the conference championship games. The conventional wisdom about how you build a winning NFL team is wrong. We'll explore how today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, January 20th, 2026, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Well, the conference championship games are set in the NFL. The Broncos and Patriots will play for the AFC Championship this coming Sunday, and the Rams and Seahawks will play for the NFC Championship. Four successful franchises. And on today's show, we're going to compare these four franchises, and we're going to take a look at why they prove to teams like the Jets that the conventional wisdom for how you build a successful NFL team is frequently wrong. We'll discuss whether you prioritize offense or defense more. We'll discuss how they found their head coaches, and we'll begin by talking about how these teams found their quarterbacks. In the Jets fan base, the last couple of weeks have been a roller coaster. I think it's fair to say that a large portion of the fan base was very excited week 18 when the Jets lost to the Buffalo Bills, not because the Jets lost, but because the Jets secured the second overall pick in the 2026 NFL draft, which was a big deal because at that point, it seemed like there would be two top quarterbacks in this year's draft class. Fernando Mendoza of Indiana and Dante Moore of Oregon. And if you had a top two pick, it meant you would get one of those two guys. Then came the Peach Bowl. It was the college football playoff semifinal. It pitted Mendoza and Indiana versus Moore and Oregon. And Mendoza played great. Moore played pretty badly. Now, you can look at the stats and say maybe Moore's performance wasn't so bad, but there was some stat padding after the game got out of hand there. I think if you watched that game in context, you knew Dante Moore did not play well. That sent a panic through the Jets fan base. People were worried. Can we trust Dante Moore with the #2 overall pick? But a couple of days pass, and you allow yourself to say, you know what? It's one bad game against an elite team. He's only 20 years old. He's got plenty of time to grow and develop. Things will be okay. Then Dante Moore announced that he's returning to Oregon for 2026. That left the Jets without a quarterback. And that's left a large portion of the fan base saying, well, now the Jets can't get their franchise quarterback. Here's the thing, though. If you look at the four teams that are playing this coming weekend, really only one of them got their quarterback through a high draft pick after a dismal season. That was New England 2 years ago when they stumbled and they ended up with the third overall pick in the 2024 NFL draft and picked Drake May. It was a good parting gift by Bill Belichick in his final year as Patriots head coach. And now 2 years later, they are on the cusp of the Super Bowl. And I think it's very tempting for Jets fans to look at that model and say, well, that's the only way you can get a good quarterback. You have a terrible season, you get a high draft pick, you pick a quarterback, and everything's okay. Of course, it's not that simple. I mean, that's the formula for the Houston Texans. And the Texans have had some success with C.J. Stroud, but I think there are lots of questions about C.J. Stroud going forward. I think maybe C.J. Stroud's getting a little bit too much grief over two bad playoff games, but it's been shown over and over that, first of all, getting the high draft pick is not a guarantee you're going to the Super Bowl. Second of all, there are other ways to find quarterbacks because the other three teams all found quarterbacks in a different way. Their opponents this weekend, the Denver Broncos, will be playing their backup, Jarrett Stidham, because of a late game injury Bo Nix suffered, but Nix was the 12th overall pick. Yeah, the Broncos used a first-round pick. Yeah, it was in the top half of the first round, but it was the 12th pick. It wasn't the first pick. It wasn't the second pick. It wasn't the third pick. Nix was the 5th quarterback off the board in 2024. That was not a tanking situation that netted the Broncos Bo Nix. You look to the NFC, well, of course, the Rams made a big trade to get Matthew Stafford, a veteran quarterback. The Seattle Seahawks signed up Sam Darnold, a player who's very familiar to the New York Jets, a player we talked a bit about on yesterday's show. You everydayers may remember that discussion. Darnold, I don't think you could call him a reclamation project at the point Seattle signed him because he was coming off a pretty good season with the Minnesota Vikings, leading the Vikings to a 14-3 record. But I think it's fair to say there was skepticism about Darnold. His record has been spotty, or it had been spotty before he went to Seattle. And while he played very well a year ago in Minnesota, the end of his season was really ugly. Bad performance in a Week 18 loss to the Detroit that cost Minnesota the 1 seed. Bad performance in a wild card loss to the Rams in a game the Vikings went in as the favorites. But Darnold showed up in Seattle. They put a good system around him. They gave him good coaching, and it all worked out. And I think this is a very important discussion to have for the New York Jets and for Jets fans right now. Because if the mindset is that you need a top pick to get a great quarterback, if you need a top pick to get a quarterback who your team has a shot at winning with, that's a great thing right now for Aaron Glenn. And it's a great thing for Darren Muji, and it's a great thing for Woody Johnson, and it's a great thing for everyone in a management role in this organization, because they can go to you and say, well, we did everything in our power. We did everything the right way. We lost all these games at the end of the season. We tried to get a good draft pick. We thought we were going to get a quarterback. Then at the last minute, Dante Moore surprised us all by going back to school. And we can go forward into 2026. And the plan can be, maybe we'll tank again for try and get a quarterback in 2027. And you can't blame them if it went wrong, because, again, they did everything the right way. That's if we believe the mindset that the only way to get a good quarterback, and it's important, it's essential in this league. You can run into a decent season or two without a quarterback. The Jets did that the first couple of years with Rex Ryan when they had a great defense and they had a great offensive line and a great run game. But over the long haul, you want to be a consistent winner in this league, you got to figure out the quarterback position. The challenge, though, is that we've seen it, because 3 of these 4 teams, and all in different ways, Broncos with a later first-round pick, the Rams through the trade market, and the Seahawks through free agency, they've found a way to get a quarterback they can win with. And these quarterbacks aren't all spectacular. I mean, Bo Nix, year 2, I think he's made good progress so far in his career. He's about a middle of the pack starter right now. Broncos have great coaching on the offensive side of the ball. They have some talented and skill positions. They have a great defense. But they got a quarterback who's good enough to win with, because they built up the other parts of the team. Same could be said of Seattle. Seattle, Jackson Smith and Jigba, one of the best receivers in the league. They have some other good skill players. They've got a great defense. And the Rams have great coaching in Sean McVay. And they went out and they made a big move for a veteran quarterback, a quarterback who was an elite level passer who became available. And the lesson here is that we can't let the Jets off the hook. And this is been one of the themes on this show over the last couple of weeks. And I'm going to keep hammering this point home, because I think it's important that the Jets want you to have low expectations for them. The Jets want you to believe that, you know what, these wins and losses don't matter. And even if we lose, we win, because we get a high draft pick for a quarterback. I think that this season really showed you the folly of tanking. It's theoretically possible that, you run into the situation like New England and you get Drake May and the quarterback changes everything. But if we're being realistic, those situations are the vast minority. It can't be your only plan. And one of the big problems with the Jets franchise over the last 15 years, and we could probably even say beyond, is that they just hope that they luck into a good situation. The way New England if we're being honest, New England kind of lucked into the situation with Drake May. And that's not to say they haven't made other good moves. I think firing Gerard Mayo after one season, bringing in Mike Vrabel was a game changer for them. They've made some other good moves along the way, but Drake May falling to them in 2024, them getting that pick for Drake May, that was a franchise changer. The other 3 franchises haven't really had that, though. There are 3 teams playing this weekend, the weekend where the other 28 teams, including the Jets, all want to be. And they did not tank for a quarterback. And the idea that the Jets now have to go into 2026 and try and tank for a quarterback in 2027, didn't we just see how that failed? Aren't we seeing that there are other ways to do it, that you can build up the rest of your team, that you can be opportunistic when something presents itself, like the Rams did? Now, the Jets aren't in the position the Rams were in early 2021 when they traded for Matthew Stafford. Rams were a team that had gone to the divisional round, and they viewed Stafford as the final piece of the puzzle. That's not where the Jets are right now. Frankly, it's not where the Jets were 2 years ago when they made the Aaron Rodgers trade. But you see that there are multiple paths. There's no guaranteed path to getting a great quarterback, and there's more than one way of doing it. And if the Jets keep going down this road where they act like, you can excuse the losses because we're just doing it to get a quarterback. We've tried that. It didn't work. There are other ways to get it done. And the Jets need to be cognizant of that. Their plan A has failed. They are not getting Dante Moore this year. The plan B cannot just be, we're going to throw away another season and pray that we get a quarterback next year. The plan's got to be to build up. Even if you don't get your franchise quarterback in 2026, put an organization, put an infrastructure in place that will be better and will help that quarterback when he finally arrives. That had you on the Locked On Jets podcast. I think another thing these 4 teams have in common is great leadership, especially with the head coaches that they have. All four of these head coaches, though, have differences on the surface. The similarities are what matter, but I don't think NFL fans always appreciate what the similarities are in great coaches. We'll discuss that as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire someone for this show, I'd go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what I need. Real experience, not just a resume buzzword. Instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. Sponsored posts boost your job to the people who are the best match for your role, and that makes a real difference. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house, it's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action, so when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood. Now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you have not already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. It includes access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Jets compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app, along with an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server. Go to LockedOnNYJets.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. On today's show, we are talking about the 4 teams playing on Championship Sunday: the Patriots, the Broncos, the Seahawks, and the Rams, and lessons the New York Jets can learn from these teams as they try and rebuild. I think this is rebuild number 5 or 6 in the last decade and a half. It's been a long time since the Jets played in the conference championship games. That was in the 2010-2011 season. The Jets had beaten the Patriots in the divisional round in a shocking upset, then went to Pittsburgh and unfortunately were defeated by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers then went to the Super Bowl and lost to Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. In our first segment, we talked about how these teams found their quarterbacks in different ways. Another thing that was really noticeable to me as I studied these teams is how different these head coaches are. There are 4 head coaches this weekend. You have one who was a first-time hire on the offensive side of the ball. That's Sean Payton. You have one who was a first-time head coach on the defensive side of the ball. That's Mike Macdonald. You have a guy who was experienced before, who was an offensive coach in Sean Payton with Denver, and an experienced guy from the defensive side of the ball, New England, with Mike Vrabel. I think that that's really interesting. And I think that it shows that there's a bit of a misguided feeling in the media, and I think among certain elements of the NFL fan base, that the path to success is always hiring a first-time head coach from the offensive side of the ball. The thing that really puzzles me about it is I think every coach brings certain strengths and weaknesses to the table. And one of the most important things about a head coach is he needs to understand what his strengths are and where he needs to compensate for his weaknesses. And I think more than anything, when you hire a coaching staff, you're trying to hire guys who have skills that you lack. So, if you're a head coach from the offensive side of the ball, you're probably going to really focus on finding a guy who really understands how to run a defense. That's critical. Vice versa. Come from the defensive side of the ball, hiring an offensive coordinator is really important. And if you're somebody who comes from a background where you know a lot about the passing game, you want to make sure your staff is full of guys who understand the run game. If you're a coach who comes from a run background, which there aren't that many in the NFL, most of the offensive minds are more focused on the passing game. But there are a couple of coaches out there who have more of a basis in the run game. You want to make sure you have someone who understands passing concepts. We could go down the list. If you're a coach who has a big background in quarterback play, you want to make sure you have a good offensive line coach because you're not as familiar with how to develop an offensive line. This is critical. And for whatever reason, in the NFL, in the media, I think, again, in certain segments of the fan base, you look at like the weaknesses that coaches have. And for whatever reason, it's been decided that the one thing he can't have is a coach from a defensive background. Because even if he hires a great offensive coordinator, the offensive coordinator could get a head coaching job. You see that across the league. I mean, I think the latest example people are pointing to is the Lions with Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell, I guess nominally is an offensive coach, but Ben Johnson got a lot of credit for the Lions' success. And not that Ben Johnson didn't deserve the credit. Ben Johnson's a great coach in his own right. I think he did a great job year one in Chicago. But it's kind of crazy to me that people say Ben Johnson was what was missing from Detroit this year. Detroit had the number 4 ranked scoring offense in the league. Their issue is that they fell from 7th to 22nd in scoring defense. And my point here is not that Aaron Glenn was the real problem. Losing Aaron Glenn was the real problem with Detroit, although I think it probably is truer than a lot of people would want to admit. I think the point is that these narratives kind of catch a life of their own and nobody really tests them. Did the Lions miss Ben Johnson this year? I mean, I'm sure they did a little bit, but I don't think that was the determining factor in why they fell off this year. In fact, I think the number one factor in why they fell off is that it's really hard to go 15-2 back-to-back seasons. I think when you have the kind of season 14-3 back-to-back seasons, you have the kind of season they did last year, it's natural you're going to fall back a little bit. You have to regress a little bit. Everything went right for them a year ago. But every coach brings different weaknesses to the table. I don't understand the mindset that the thing that will destroy your franchise more than anything is losing your offensive coordinator. It very rarely happens. In fact, I mean, you go down the list of teams that have had coaches with defensive backgrounds. I mean, how many times did the offensive coordinator losing that guy make a material difference? The only one I can come up with is when Dan Quinn was in Atlanta, he had Kyle Shanahan as his offensive coordinator. Matt Ryan won the MVP in 2016. The Falcons went to the Super Bowl. Shanahan got hired by San Francisco as their head coach in 2017. Okay, the Atlanta offense fell off. Kyle Shanahan's also an elite coach in his own right. There aren't really many instances where losing an offensive coordinator has devastated a franchise. The idea is that, you don't want your quarterback to have to change systems, and that hiring a head coach with an offensive background means that, he'll be running the same offense as long as your head coach is employed. But I mean, Tom Brady changed his offensive coordinator plenty of times. He seemed like he was fine. We could go down the list. Josh Allen's had offensive coordinator changes. I think he's done okay. Lamar Jackson, an offensive coordinator change kind of took him to new heights a couple of years ago when the Ravens moved on from Greg Roman, who was one of the few offensive coaches who's more focused on the run game, and brought in Todd Monken, who's a really good offensive coordinator. I can't really think of many instances where losing the offensive coordinator has been the linchpin for a team collapsing. And that seems to be the mindset that a lot of NFL fans have. I think the way this stuff gets applied is kind of odd also, because, one of the offensive head coaches who's had the most success in this league is Nick Sirianni, but he's had a couple of years where he's made poor offensive coordinator hires. Nick Sirianni was an offensive coordinator before he took the Eagles job, but suddenly the offensive coordinators aren't working, and now he's a CEO style coach who proves the rule that you have to have a half offensive coordinator as your head coach. The whole thing doesn't make a lot of sense. What you want is a good head coach. You want a good guy who understands how to lead a team and a guy who understands how to build a staff. And, if it's somebody like Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay who happens to call their own plays, hey, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a nice thing to have in a head coach. But if it's a head coach from another area of the game, I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, do you think the Giants had an issue hiring John Harbaugh? I think that was a great hire, even though he doesn't come from an offensive background. We can go down the list. I mean, there are plenty of great head coaches with defensive backgrounds. So I think that we get a little bit lost trying to say that there's a specific sort of head coach. What you want is somebody with leadership skills, somebody who knows how to hire a staff, someone who knows how to delegate, someone who's trying to stay on the cutting edge of the league. Those are the things that are important. It's not the side of the ball your coach comes from. And I hear Jets fans complain about Aaron Glenn because Aaron Glenn's another defensive head coach. In the Woody Johnson era, the Jets have only hired first-time head coaches from the defensive side of the ball. except for Adam Gase. Adam Gase was the only offensive coach the Jets have hired in the Woody Johnson era, and he's the only coach with previous head coaching experience. There are lots of different ways you can get a good head coach. Now, one caveat I will say is that you might be listening to this and say, well, John, you're the one who always says the Jets should hire an experienced head coach when they have an opening. I do say that. That's more about the owner not being able to pick out a good head coaching prospect, though. I don't think that the Jets are inherently doomed because Aaron Glenn comes from a defensive background. I think that the issue with Glenn is just more that he hasn't shown he's up to the job. If the Jets hired Mike Macdonald, the Seahawks head coach, do you really think that they'd be in the same situation they are right now? I don't. I think Macdonald's a really good head coach. I think he's done good things in Seattle. I think he would have done good things if he was with the Jets. So I think that this is one of those things that, it's become kind of conventional wisdom in the NFL that's better to have an offensive-minded head coach. I don't think the results really prove that, though. And the final four teams show us that. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, I have one more thought on the lessons learned from this. And along the lines of the idea that you need a head coach with an offensive background, there's also a big school of thought that defense just doesn't matter in this league. But the final four teams show that that's not the case. They're having a lot of success because of their defense. We'll dive into that deeper, continuing here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Kicking off the year feeling good is the goal, right? And honestly, hydration is the easiest win. When I stay on top of it, my energy, focus, and mood all level up. But let's be real. Plain water does not always cut it, especially when you're grinding through those long days, hitting the gym, or just trying to stay consistent with your health goals. That's where Drip Drop comes in. Doctor-developed, proven fast hydration that helps your body and mind work better. Think clearer focus, better energy, elevated mood, and even that fresh skin glow. Drip Drop's science-backed formula is trusted by firefighters, medical professionals, and over 90% of top college and pro teams because it rehydrates you faster and more effectively than water alone. They have flexible subscription options, so you're never stuck without it, whether you're hitting the gym, juggling work, or just staying consistent with your goals. And right now, Drip Drop is offering podcast listeners 20% off your first order. Go to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 20% off. Stock up now at dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts you can apply to the bet you like most. Open the profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boost you want to apply. The boost lets you lean into your game day instincts, whether you're backing momentum, defense, quarterback play, or coaching. The boosts give you more juice on the bets you already like instead of forcing you to bet something new. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. You make your picks, then you apply your profit boosts to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're talking about lessons to be learned from the four teams that will be playing in the conference championship games. They are the Denver Broncos and the New England Patriots in the AFC, and the Los Angeles Rams and the Seattle Seahawks in the NFC. And I think that the way these teams have been built have been very different. But one thing they have in common is they are all really good teams. Which, that's the reason you tune into this podcast for expert analysis like that the four teams playing in the conference championship games are really good teams. But one thing that strikes me is the balance that these teams have. And I think this is important to point out because, first of all, there is a mindset, again, in the NFL media and then in certain corners of the NFL fan base that offense is all that matters in this league. That, it really doesn't matter how your defense plays. As long as you have an offense, you have a shot, and you have the worst defense in the league. As long as you have a good offense, you're going to be a great team. These teams kind of disprove that. Let me go through the scoring rankings of these for these teams, offensive and defensively. The Rams had the number 1 scoring offense, the 10th scoring defense. Seahawks had the number 3 scoring offense, the number 1 scoring defense. Broncos had the number 14 scoring offense, the number 3 scoring defense. Patriots, the number 2 scoring offense, the number 4 scoring defense. So you see the offense really matters, of course. Number 1, number 2, and number 3 in scoring this year are playing in the conference championship game. And Denver is 14th, which is still a little bit above average. But you also see on the defensive side of the ball, you have the number 1, number 3, and number 4 scoring defenses. So 3 of the top 4 scoring defenses are playing this weekend. And the only team that's not in the top 4 was number 10. That's the Rams. So all of these teams have a top 10 defense. Now, I think that's important to point out because, yes, the rules do skew to help the offenses. And that's just been the case through NFL history. The league is focused on adding more and more offense. A long time ago, decades and decades ago, the people running the NFL figured out fans really like high scoring games. So you look historically through the league, they have consistently changed the rules to benefit offense. They've made it tougher and tougher to play defense. And that's one of the reasons that, comparisons statistically across eras just don't work, because the game is so different from what it was even 20 years ago, much less 50 years ago, much less 70 years ago. And that's why, people always say this stuff is cyclical. It's not cyclical when you keep changing the rules, because the offense keeps getting advantages and defense keeps getting disadvantages. But at the end of the day, everybody's playing under the same rules. And if I can, even if I'm giving up more points, if I can stop teams better than the rest of the league, if my defense is better than the rest of the league, even if everyone's giving up more points, if I have a better defense than you, it's a big advantage for me. Now, we can have a discussion about how you build your team, because one thing numbers do show is that offensive performance is more consistent year to year than defensive performance. And that's pretty logical if you think about it, because a lot of offensive performance is based on the quarterback. It's based on one player. If you have the same quarterback every year, that's a stabilizer on offense that defense can't really have. But we think about where the Jets are right now. This is a team that really just doesn't have many pieces at the moment. I mean, what's the foundation of the Jets? You have a good wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. No, a really good wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's a star. You have two really promising bookend tackles. Outside of that, I mean, there's not that many pieces. I mean, you want to say Jawan Briggs on the defense? I mean, maybe. I don't think Jawan Briggs is a star, though. You want to say maybe Sherwood bounces back at linebacker? I'd like to see it. I like Sherwood, but he didn't have a very good season this year. Maybe Zariah Thomas has a big year too, but Jets are pretty much starting from scratch here. That's the bottom line. And I think that the Jets really need to think about how they're going to allocate their resources. Now, my belief is that the trades that they made at the deadline, Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner, were about reallocating resources, because the Jets did have some legitimate talent on the defensive side of the ball, namely Quinnen and Sauce, and they traded those guys. My thought is that with all these extra draft picks, either this year or next year, maybe both years, you'll see the Jets draft a quarterback pretty early. I'm not sure the Jets are going to draft a quarterback at 2 at this point, but at 16 maybe, at 33 maybe, at 44 maybe, and maybe with one of their 3 first-round picks next year. And they certainly, if they want to, they have the resources to potentially move up in the 2027 draft. I think that part of the idea was they know they're probably drafting a quarterback at some point, in the next 2 years, and they wanted to make sure that the talent wasn't all on defense. They wanted to have draft picks they could use to build up the offense around whatever quarterback that is. And that's fair, and that's fine if the Jets want to focus more on the offensive side of the ball. If the Jets want to prioritize offense a little bit more than defense, that makes sense, and that's probably the rationale behind those trades. But you can't completely ignore the defense. The defense the Jets put on the field near the end of the season was just unplayably bad. I mean, they just had no pieces at all. And they didn't have any pieces on offense either, because Garrett Wilson was out. So the wide receiver position was pretty much just, a spot where they didn't have any quality players. Brady Cook's just not an NFL caliber quarterback. But I think if the idea is that, you're just going to load up on offense, then the defense doesn't matter. You're in for a rude awakening, because the teams that are playing this weekend are good at both. And, 2 of these teams, New England and Seattle, are absolutely elite at both. The Rams are a little bit more based on offense, but their defense is still really good. Broncos, a little bit more on defense. Their offense is still above average. And that makes sense, because the great teams in this league have multiple ways to win. There can be days where your offense just can't do anything, and you need to lean on your defense to deliver a victory. And vice versa. There are going to be games where you face prolific offenses where your defense gets shredded. If your offense has the ability to win a shootout, it makes life easier. And when you play both at a high level, you blow teams out, you should blow out. You don't let teams hang in games. You got to have, I really believe that the best path to winning in the NFL is to have a balanced team. I mean, I think it's common sense. You want your team to be as good as possible. So the Jets have all these resources going forward, and they will have ample opportunity to build up a good roster in the next 2 years. I don't think it can all be focused on the offensive side of the ball, though, if the Jets want to be a great team. Now, again, if they want to develop a quarterback, it's different. It's one thing saying that, we should probably skew a little bit more on offense to help out whatever quarterback we draft. I mean, that's one thing. It's another to say we just completely disregard the defensive side of the ball, because the Jets need to be able to stop people. It doesn't help the offense if the defense is getting shredded every single week, because we're trying to develop a quarterback. You want to leave him in good situations. And statistically, most interceptions are thrown when you're behind in the second half of a game. The quarterback has to start forcing passes in there. Quarterback feels like he has to start making big plays. It's not what you want. So anybody who thinks offense is all that matters in this league, well, I think the teams in the conference championship game show you otherwise. It's not, and by the way, I'm not saying that you just build up the defense at the expense of the offense. You got to be great everywhere in this league if you really want to win big. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow on Locked On Jets, we'll have our weekly mailbag. Can't wait to answer your questions. We'll chat then.